Welcome everyone to episode 10, the final episode of season 3 of the Northern Spin podcast. I'm Michael Taylor. By day, I'm a journalist, broadcaster, walker, father, husband, all of the above, and the editor of Business Desk in the Northwest. Here's my happy, clappy, conservative-loving co-presenter, Chris Maguire. Chris, what bringeth good news this week?
Well, my cuppeth spilleth over. I'm the executive editor of Business Cloud and Tech Blast, as you mentioned there. Can't believe it's the end of...
You've got about 10 startup businesses you run as well.
No, I've got a few little things. I'm keeping the economy going, or at least I'm trying to. One of them's going to work. It could be this podcast. But I can't believe it's the end of season 3 of Northern Spin already. But I am the bearer of good news. Now, I love a statistic and facts. I actually, one of my little party tricks is I can tell you the score of any Premiership result this season, more often than not. But 6 of our first 9 episodes of season 3 appear in the top 10 of the most downloaded episodes of the podcast ever, which of course we started last September. So the news is we're growing.
That's great news. I've got some good news as well. After a short break, after the elections in May, season 4 of Northern Spin will be back, won't we?
Yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Sponsors are on board. We've got some good ideas for interviews.
Yeah.
A few little tweaks to the running order. And if you've got some ideas of your own, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. And questions as well. You know, I'll put something on social media. Now, I know that you don't drink, Michael, but Northern Spin is without doubt the Heineken of podcasts because it quite literally reaches the parts that other podcasts don't reach.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we remain in Apple's podcast charts in the UK and Bahrain. We love Bahrain, France and Ireland. We went up a lot in Ireland last week. I looked at a heat map of our downloads and we've got listeners as far north as Iceland and the Shetland Islands. So I always think to myself, there's somebody, maybe a cattle farmer, listening to an episode of Northern Spin, and that makes me feel really warm and tingly.
Good. It always amazes me, amuses me and delights me, actually, how many people come up to me and say that they love the podcast with, you know, ideas and suggestions. So yeah, fantastic. I'm glad we're hitting the spot with some people. Got some nice comments over the weekend as well. I shared it on Facebook, which I don't normally do, and tagged in a lot of friends and family around the world. So maybe that accounts for some of the Irish numbers.
Well, fingers crossed. I was talking to a we're looking at hosting an event potentially in Manchester, and he said that he did his due diligence on me and he spoke to a friend in Sheffield, and he said, yeah, he's a guy who co-presents the Northern Spin. Somebody else came up to me and said, Chris, there's nothing wrong with being happy clappy. So that nickname that you've given me looks like it's here to stay.
So what we're talking about this week on the podcast, Chris?
Lots to go at. We decided that given the fact we're having a short break, we need to shine a light on the forthcoming local elections on May the 4th and why the red wall seats across the north are going to be so important to the overall outcome. There are 8,000 seats up for grabs, and they represent Rishi Sunak's first electoral test since becoming Prime Minister. So we're going to be identifying the key battlegrounds across the north.
I always love it when the elections fall on May the 4th because it's Star Wars Day, isn't it?
I'm not a big Star Wars fan.
May the 4th be with you.
Oh, right. Okay.
There you go.
Tumbleweed.
So we're also going to be talking through the podcast about Labour's magic money tree. That's not a phrase I would ever use. In fact, I think George Osborne fell off his dinosaur using it in 2010. But it's definitely Chris's description, which I will put him right about. We're going to return to something we touched on a couple of episodes ago, the junior doctor strike, which is very topical, as in a separate pay dispute. The Royal College of Nursing have announced another 48-hour strike after their members rejected the pay offer for England, while Unison workers in the NHS accepted theirs.
And you want to talk about something we spoke about, I think, in Series 1, which was the problems at Manchester Airport, and there could be some good news there.
Yeah, I think it seems to be getting better. As we end Season 3 of Northern Spin and prepare for Season 4, we simply couldn't do it without our colleagues and friends at What Media, who expertly produce our podcast every week. They're the kings of video content creation, and they turn our weekly ramblings into the hit weekly podcast and YouTube show that is Northern Spin. They took a punt on us back in September, signed up for the journey, and I have to say it's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you to Jamie and Ellis in particular, who are with us in the studio right now, producing the Northern Spin podcast.
And Jamie's a crowd surfer, we discovered earlier.
Yeah, and Elise is a dog walker for a fella as well. Really, you're a real credit to your parents, you two. Do you know that? Absolutely fantastic.
That's a really old person thing to say
I know,
as well.
Isn't it? Yeah. Well, we are old people.
Yeah.
Anyway, come on. We're going to go to our first interval, or at first our break. That was just the intro, and hear about our first sponsor, Oscar Technology.
Oscar share Northern Spin's commitment to integrity. Oscar is a growing and award-winning recruitment consultancy delivering talent across multiple sectors, including tech, digital, life sciences, energy, and construction. They've got bases all over the world, and when it comes to tech recruitment, Oscar is the name you can trust. Welcome back to Northern Spin. Before we fly around the north as part of our local election roundup, it's worth providing a bit of background about these local elections because not all our listeners will be devotees of local elections.
No, well, I've got my anorak on now for some proper deep dive into the intricacies of politics across local government in the north of England. Not all local elections are the same. There are 3 types of election that are coming up this year. Some councils will be electing all of their local councillors, and they do that on a 4-year basis. Some elect half their local councillors every 2 years, and some elect a third of their local councillors. Usually that's when they are what's called multi-member wards. So you'll have 3 people in a particular council area, and you rotate. So you have an election pretty much every year, and then what's called a fallow year in the 4th year. On May the 4th, Star Wars Day, a total of 230 local authorities will be holding elections. Of these, 130 of them are whole council elections. 100 are electing a third of their members. Of the 130 electing their whole council, and sometimes this is as a result of boundary changes, the vast majority were up for election in 2019. So you have to sort of bear in mind when you're comparing like for like, what the political climate was like in 2019, right? Who was leader of different parties? What other small parties were around at the time? So one interesting aspect of these elections, which I think is worth focusing on as well, is that these elections, for the first time in England, voters will need to show a form of photographic ID to cast their vote. A passport, a driving licence, a blue badge, they're all valid. An Oyster card in London, apparently, is valid if you're old, but not if you're young.
Well, you mentioned the photo IDs, and I do think it's a step in the right direction. But your old mate, Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham, stirred the pot this week. He tweeted this. He said, "Can the Conservatives honestly hold their hands up and say they made no calculation about securing political advantage when deciding to introduce voter ID?" Now, you are, we've mentioned before on this podcast, a fully paid up member of the Andy Burnham fan club. I think you're honorary secretary. And I like Andy Burnham, but that's a bit trumpy of Burnham to be criticising the rules even before the election. I mean, you've got to admit that, Michael, surely.
Well, no, I think he's only articulating what many people are saying, which is that this is a very heavy-handed solution to a problem that's been drastically overstated. And I think it's only right, therefore, to ask what calculation the Conservatives have done when they've made this decision about photo ID for voting. Personally, I'm actually all in favour of using technology much more widely to sort of clean up the whole system about using ID for people to access all sorts of different public services. There are so many different bureaucracies that allow us to use government services that aren't joined up. So I've got a national insurance number, driving licence number. During the pandemic, the NHS rapidly upgraded its capability, and we've all got an NHS app on our smartphones now. I've got a passport. My student ID that I had until last year used to get me into places and access all sorts of different services. So yeah, and voting has actually never been sensible. All you need is particularly complicated. All you need is your polling card with your number on, and you turn up, and then you don't even need that sometimes. You just go up and say what your name is and where you live. And the Tories seem to think that there's a problem of voter fraud, and yet there doesn't seem to be any evidence that anyone's ever been prosecuted for it, or that there's any particular surprise in any of the elections that have ever happened. Do you think that's true?
I think the thing is, it's becoming an increasing issue, and if you've got the technology available, you might as well use it. There's going to be winners and losers, but it won't be photo ID that will decide the outcome of this local election, in my opinion. I think what I think is really interesting about these local elections is that if you look at a map of the UK and look at where these elections are taking place, it's not all across the country. So there are pockets, and a huge pocket is across the north. And it was interesting, Greg Hands, the Tory party chairman, was doing the rounds yesterday, recording this on Mondays on the TV on Sunday, basically saying that we expect to lose 1,000 seats. So he's basically trying to, do a bit of the...
They're saying that already?
Yeah.
Wow.
He's basically trying to lay the groundwork to say, we expect to lose 1,000 seats. We said as much 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. The Tories have the most to lose because 36% of the councils up for election are Conservative majority councils. A further 35% have no single party, which is really where the interest is. Only 20% are currently Labour controlled. The way we've decided to try and do this is we don't want to look at every single election across the north because we'll be here all day and we'll bore our listeners, our growing number of listeners. But we've broken it down into 4 areas. The northeast, which I think is really interesting. Yorkshire and Humber, we're going to do a little bit on. Major cities like Liverpool, which is interesting. Leeds, Manchester and Sheffield. And the northwest. Full disclosure, I've been pressed in the flesh this last week, speaking to various people, doing loads of research. But a lot of the figures that we've got have come from the Local Government Information Unit's Local Election Guide, and that's really fascinating. As you know, Michael, we do like to give credit to other publications, don't we?
Yes, we always like to give credit to other publications and researchers, academics, whoever.
Absolutely, it's important we do that. Now we'll start in the northeast because if the Conservatives do badly, then in the northeast, then the omens for the general election won't be good at all. And that's the reason we're so excited by the local elections for, because a lot of people see this as the forerunner to the general election in a year or 18 months' time. There are only 10 seats up for grabs in the northeast.
10 councils?
Yeah, 10 councils. Yeah, sorry, 10 councils. Only 10 councils up for grabs in the northeast. They can be split into 2 blocks of 5. You've got the 5 Tyneside Labour councillors, Labour councils, which will be those in and around Newcastle, and they're unlikely to change hands. They are Labour, but all eyes are focused on the 5 councils in and around Teesside. So that would be Hartlepool area as well.
Hartlepool, Middlesbrough, Redcar, places like that.
Darlington and Middlesbrough. Now, Conservative Teesside Mayor Ben Blocker-Houchin. I know a few people do play Northern Spin Bingo, so if we don't mention Blocker-Houchin, they won't get a line. He's always said that the northeast, especially his own Teesside base, is the one region which has got real tangible evidence of levelling up in action. The Treasury opened a base in Darlington. There's the Freeport, albeit that might not be good news for local crabs. They would deny that. And there's been millions of pounds worth of inward investment. Teesside itself is where the action is because the 5 councils there are classified as having no overall control, meaning, as the name suggests, no single party has a majority.
Yeah, but interestingly, Darlington is Tory run, but they don't have a majority, so they have those alliances with those little independent groups who often represent specific local areas. And clearly Labour want to reverse Tory control of Darlington. That's going to be quite an interesting one to watch, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Rishi Sunak's been there pointing at potholes.
Which, as you know, was repaired last week. That's without doubt the worst picture of this election run-up. I think we're making this about, or there's a danger of making this about Conservatives versus Labour. That's not the case. The Lib Dems are going to have a huge part to play. But a lot of these local elections...
Northeast, do you think so?
A lot of these local elections have got, not in the northeast, but a lot of these local elections have got a lot of independents as well. And they can really hold the balance a lot of the time. Darlington Council, you mentioned it. 2019, the Conservatives gained control of the council for the first time in 40 years. They do rely on these cross-party alliances, to get stuff done. The Conservatives control the council, but Labour are desperate to return to power. What's interesting about Darlington is that if you're looking for a Labour versus Conservative contest, Darlington is it. If Labour can win Darlington and win it back, it's a big step, big step in the right direction for Keir Starmer.
Good. What about Middlesbrough, though? What's going on there? Because they've got not only a council, which was traditionally Labour controlled for a long time, they've also got a directly elected mayor, Andy Preston, and we spoke about him last week on the podcast, where I said he's one of those mayors, directly elected leader for an area with he's got no particular base. There isn't an Andy Preston party. He's a bit of a Tory, ex-hedge fund guy, isn't he? Who's the local hero gone home. He doesn't really have any great power because he doesn't have a cabinet that particularly respects him. So I think it's touch and go whether he'll get back in again.
I'm not sure. There's 4 mayoral elections on May the 4th, and the only one that's really relevant to us is the one in Middlesbrough. I mean, Andy Preston's an interesting character. I don't know him. He is independent, and one would think he would lend himself to conservatism given his background. But he's not very popular. Labour have been very, very critical of him. And the council has had a difficult time as well. I think one of the challenges you've got in Middlesbrough is that they're top of all the league tables you don't want to be top of, or towards the top, like social deprivation, poverty, drug misuse. There's a high preponderance. Crime as well. You look at what he's putting out on social media, and he went public last week and he said that there's this campaign against me, but I'm not going to, I'm not going to rise to it. That would presumably be led by the Labour Party, because they really have been at loggerheads. So I think there's a lot of interest in Middlesbrough, and particularly that mayoral debate.
Yeah, definitely. So the North East as a whole is going to be a key test to see if Labour can make some real dents into what a lot of people in politics are calling the red wall. It'll be a real test about Labour's lead in the national opinion polls to see whether that translates into a local level. At a local level. And it's no coincidence that people like Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner have been seen in and around Darlington a lot. That's why we're not doing on manoeuvres this week, isn't it? Because everyone's behaving themselves and being party loyalists.
Just keep an eye out
at elections.
Just keep an eye out, listeners, for Hartlepool and Stockton on Tees. Stockton's another council with no overall control. The Labour Party lost single party control of the council in 2019. They only need to pick up a handful of seats, and to regain their majority. So basically, I'm saying to everybody, keep an eye out on Teesside.
Very good. So next, we're going to go to Yorkshire and Humber. This region has 5 unitary authorities, 7 metropolitan districts with elections this year. In 2022, the Lib Dems took control of Hull City Council, ending a decade of Labour Party rule. That was, of course, John Prescott's old stomping ground, the former Deputy Prime Minister. The Lib Dems controlled 29 of the council's 57 seats. Labour previously with a local party, but the Lib Dems are able to form an administration despite not having a majority. Sheffield's another one to watch. Labour have had a bit of a rough ride and being pushed by the Greens. They obviously had Magic Majid, the mayor, for a while, from the Green Party over there. They've had a load of heat locally about cutting down trees. That could be a key factor in the elections in Sheffield. The Lib Dems have run Sheffield, and there's actually some quite prosperous parts of the area, like Sheffield Hallam constituency towards the Peak District, where Nick Clegg was the MP for a long time. So I think, that could be an interesting little tussle.
I definitely don't think instantly. We talk about this tree felling row, and it's very easy if you don't understand it to think to yourself, well, it's just a load of tree huggers. It's absolutely not.
No, it's a big issue in Sheffield.
There were loads of trees were literally cut down with no warning. It created a real stink.
It did. So also keep your eye on Kirklees and Calderdale. That's in old money, that's Halifax and Huddersfield, where Labour are the largest party. Calderdale, incidentally, it's Happy Valley country, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. We love about Happy Valley
podcast before. But Chris, you want to look at the big cities with the large local authorities, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. If I was a Conservative candidate, I wouldn't stand in Manchester because of the...
You might have to. There's this phenomena, which is probably worth telling listeners about, called paper candidates, where they basically stand with absolutely no hope of winning, but they want to just keep the flag in the ground. And in multi-member wards, when there's all out elections, they literally can't field a full slate. So they might at least just put one up. That's what the Tories are doing, for instance, in parts of Stockport.
See, Manchester's got 96 seats and 91 of those are Labour. So I think it's the most Labour area anywhere in the country. Leeds as well is an interesting one. Liverpool is the one that probably fascinates me. If you look at Leeds, there's 58 Labour councillors compared to 21 Conservatives, 7 Lib Dems, few independents. Can't see a lot of change in Leeds. The one I think we should keep an eye out on is Liverpool. We've alluded to it before because Liverpool Council and Liverpool generally has gone through a tough time.
And they're having all-out elections, so every single member is up for election. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, you would expect in Labour, in Liverpool, if you're Labour, that's enough to win that seat. Because certainly, if you look at the MP situation, that's pretty much what happens.
You say that though, but there's been splits in the Labour group, and in my adult lifetime, when I first arrived in Liverpool, in the Northwest to be the editor insider in the 2000s, Liverpool was run by Liberal Democrats.
No, you're right. And the Liberal Democrats are making something of a resurgence in the south of the city. There's something I do need to, just by way of background, give some background to our listeners. So Liverpool City Council was subject to something called the Max Collar inspection. Is it pronounced Calla?
Max Calla.
Max Calla. Okay, this was incredibly damning. It followed the arrest of the then Mayor, Joe Anderson, in a corruption investigation. He subsequently stood down. The Calla investigation was so damning of the council, it prompted a raft of huge electoral reforms. It prompted a lot of changes, but especially in terms of the electoral reforms as well. So previously, Liverpool was split into 30 wards with 3 councillors elected in each. You mentioned earlier that when they would do these elections every 3 or 4 years, one of those councillors would be up for election. What they've done now is they've gone all out. So as well as the ward changes, the number of councillors have been reduced from 90 to 85. The magic number for a majority is 43 for any party to win a majority. Labour are going into this vote, I think it's with 58 votes, but with the new boundary changes and some defections to independents, the size of the majority is one to watch. Labour's biggest threat, clearly, in Liverpool won't come from the Tories. It'll come from the Lib Dems, especially in the south of the city. You mentioned earlier there is a history of the Lib Dems in Liverpool. What's your thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, it'd be a shock for Labour not to win a majority, frankly. They're under new leadership. Liam Robinson, young, bright leader, might bring something different to the Labour Party, rejuvenate it a little bit. The party's reputation clearly was damaged by the rule of Joe Anderson as the leader, not to be confused with Joanne Anderson, who did a sterling job trying to hold the whole thing together for a little while. They're getting rid of the office of mayor as well, aren't they? They're going to have a leader.
Yeah.
And it was revealed that 14 past and present Labour councillors have got 51 parking tickets that were rescinded by local officers. That doesn't look good. So I think, the performance of the Lib Dems will be pretty crucial in Liverpool. So expect to see lots of dodgy bar charts, fake magazines, fake newspapers, diamond boards with winning here on them, and all the Lib Dem pavement politics playbook, which they're famous for.
I'm going to call you up on that because, we're talking Conservatives, Labour, and yet, like I mentioned before, a lot of these seats will be decided by the independents, but the Lib Dems, I think, are going to have a really good local election. You've seen firsthand, though, in terms of the way the Lib Dems come across as this really nice party, but some of the things that they use. I mean, I saw recently.
Why do you think that?
Well, I saw.
Why do you think the Lib Dems are nice?
Well, because you don't see a lot of. Well, we don't see the nasty party type adverts, having a go at Rishi Sunak. But in terms of, I saw recently what looked like a magazine at first glance.
Yeah.
And I thought it was like, not that I read women's magazines, there's nothing against them, like Take a Break and Chat and stuff like this. Yeah. And I looked at it and there's a picture of a local, it turned out to be a Lib Dem councillor. I think she's planting a tree or something. Yeah. And I looked at it and thought to myself, that looks like Chat magazine. It wasn't. Yeah. You know what it was? It was a Lib Dem brochure.
Yeah, that's right. They do loads of this stuff. They also do handwritten letters on Basildon bond paper, handwritten, but obviously it's printed, meant to be personalised, telling people. Their big message is always to try to pivot from the centre and appeal to voters of the party who they think that they can push into third place and put a squeeze on their votes. It's actually anti-democratic, and it's a tactic known as voter suppression. So you disincentivise anybody who's inclined to vote Labour or Conservative in an area where they consider themselves to be the insurgent party who can beat the incumbent. And so they will do, in some areas, Labour leaflets in orange, defend the NHS, invest in public services. And in Tory areas, it'll be, stop creeping socialism, stop government waste, cut taxes, vote for us, we're the nice Tories. Do you think in Tory areas?
Do you think the Lib Dems have finally moved on from the disastrous alliance with the Conservatives in 2010-15?
Of course they haven't.
Yeah.
No, because you can basically fit the Lib Dem parliamentary party into a minibus still.
Yeah.
They do control a few local councils, and they've often been described as the cockroaches of local politics. Once you've got them, you can never quite get rid of them.
Yeah. But who's described them as a cockroach of local politics?
It's quite, trust me,
right, okay.
It's a widely used thing. I've heard Tim Farron using that analogy and joking about it. And once they're embedded in, they set themselves up as local champions. They create these sometimes entirely fake campaigns. You watch the utterances. Follow people like Mark Pack, who's a Lib Dem campaign director, and Councillor John Leach. He's another good example. Follow him and what he gets up to and the statements he puts out. He's just an absolute pain in the backside.
What's my favourite?
If you're not obviously a supporter of John Leach,
my favourite cockroach fact is that in the event of nuclear Armageddon, the only thing that will survive will be cockroaches.
Well, that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
That's exactly the analogy that
Let's talk about the Northwest, Michael, because I know you're interested in that.
Yeah. So in the Northwest, there are 31 different councils up for election, a few close contests to look out for. Chris, you'll no doubt be hoping the Conservatives retain their wafer-thin majority in Pendle. I don't know. Why did I say that?
Yeah.
You're a neutral observer in this.
I'm conservative, the lowercase c, but they only need to lose a single seat to lose a majority. That's why that Pendle seat is so interesting.
I can't. Yeah. We'll come on to this in a moment. Rossendale and Bury have small Labour majorities. I don't think Bury's going to go either way, as I think maybe you're suggesting. They had their all-out elections. I think Labour are quite confident. They got Christian Wakeford as the MP who defected from the Conservatives to Labour. James Frith is running a very, very visible campaign in the Bury North constituency where he wants to get re-elected as the MP. He had a very short stint between 2017 and 2019. So they've got what I would call Labour's ground game really, really firing. And they've got Lucy Smith, who's a councillor in Bury as well. She used to be a regional organiser for the Labour Party. So I think they've got a pretty strong game in Bury. I'd be very surprised if they went backwards. They seem to have dealt with their anti-Semitism problem, particularly in Bury South as well. So I think there are 10 councils in the Northwest with no overall control. So if I was marking your card, I would keep an eye out on West Lancashire, Blackpool and Bolton. Bolton is really interesting because that's where different groups in Farnworth and different parts of Bolton are really holding the balance of power there. So it's not a Tory Labour fight. It's more of the independents throwing a little bit of grit into the mix there as well. Yeah.
Look, given your background with Stockport, because you worked on the Labour group, full disclosure, we've always been very open about that for a few years before your new role at Business Desk. Lots of things happening in Stockport, and I think the Lib Dems certainly seem to be making lots of noise. What's your inside track on Stockport?
Yeah, so we spoke a little bit about the Edgeley ward last week, where former Labour councillor Matt Wynne walked, and he's formed a group called the Edgeley Community Association. He's got 2 friends of his to stand with him on that slate. He's reasonably confident, and I drove through the area last weekend and saw he's got lots of boards up outside people's houses. You always know if you're in an area where there's a contested election because it's part of the campaigners' game plan is to get people to put garden stakes with posters. Do you get them around where you live?
You do, but you would never ever see me do that.
Yeah. So the strange thing about Stockport is that Labour need the Tories to do well against the Lib Dems in the prosperous areas to the south of the borough, like Bramall North, Bramall South, Hazel Grove. There's a new ward because there are boundary changes, hence it being all-out elections, a new ward called Norbury. And see, the Lib Dems, I've said this before, they're all things to all people. They fight these very, very well-organised campaigns that try to mislead voters that the other party to the right or the left can't win here, which is their campaign slogan that they put with an arrow on people's vote share. The bar charts never really mathematically stand up to any scrutiny. My local intelligence tells me it's going to be really close in Stockport. There are a couple of ex-Labour guys standing as independents also in the Manor ward. Chris Murphy and Andy Sorton, they're trying to dent the Labour left, who are sort of colleagues around the MP, Navendu Mishra. I've talked about Matt Wynne's group in Edgeley ward as well. But really, I think the key issue there is going to be the Tory meltdown and how much the Tory group, at the moment it's 4 councillors, if they can actually hold on to their seats in Bramall North, Bramall South, and maybe gain one in Norbury and Woodsmore.
Well, one of the interesting things about local elections, though, is always voter turnout. I think it's typically about 30%, isn't it? Whereas in a general election, it's closer to 70%. Yeah. So if the Conservative vote isn't energised to come out and vote, that's going to play into the hands of Lib Dems. Yeah. One of the things in Stockport, so I worked on the elections last year, counting that, and you get to have a look at the ballots when they're opening. You can track where you think turnout is and what it's like. In Brinnington and Central Ward, which is flats in the town centre and the quite deprived estate of Brinnington, just north of the M60 motorway, turnout's around 20%. Yeah. And then you go to other wards where it's contested, the places where you have lots of garden posters and door knocking teams out all the time, gets up to about 50%. Where it's quite contested, and they're the more prosperous wards. So, but turnout, it's absolutely crucial. And the main issue to think about, so we're comparing 2019, with these elections with 2019, when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, the Brexit Party was a thing, Boris Johnson was the Tory leader, and they hadn't quite recovered, there was a whole chaos around Brexit, and the Lib Dems were an insurgent force. So, It's going to be interesting.
It's all changed.
So
let's changed since. But do the people who Workington man, Worcester woman, all these key demographic groups that the party strategists are pivoting on, are they the sort of people that turn out to vote in local elections? That's the contention. And political scientist Paula Surridge, who I read recently, says they're not.
We've just had the Grand National last week, so I'm going to give you my 3 to watch. These are the 3 elections that I'm most interested in. Darlington and Middlesbrough in the northeast, and Liverpool. And what 3 would you mark my card for?
Well, obviously Stockport for my own local interest, Bolton because of the local angle, and another one in Greater Manchester, I'm afraid, Oldham. Because there have been all those local scandals. There's been the input of the conspiracy theorists around that guy, Raja Mir. And I think the rise of the Failsworth Independent Group. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to play for. Anyway, the next bit is linked to all the elections. And I'm very interested in how you try and defend what you're calling Labour's magic money tree. Please explain what you mean.
Okay. And what I need you to do, Michael, is I need you to have an open mind about this as well, because I sense you're going to have a closed mind. Okay, last week we discussed, and I think we both agreed, that Labour's become the new nasty party after their ill-advised personal attack on Rishi Sunak.
We did no such thing. We did not agree on that one.
Okay, well
I think I pointed out to you the fact that politics is a rough trade and that politicians need to be held accountable for the things that they say and the things that they do.
Well, if you're trying to defend that personal attack on Rishi Sunak, on that horrible advert, particularly the first one.
Poor Rishi.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, listen, we didn't agree on that, seemingly. And I wonder if we're going to agree on this. Like, these are some of Labour's adverts from the last week, okay, that I've picked off. Just picked off 6 at random. Labour will take tough action to protect people from scam calls. Labour will reform planning laws to build more affordable homes. Labour will stop entire developments being sold off plans to overseas investors. Labour would freeze council tax this year. Labour would revitalise our high streets. Labour would stop people getting trapped in unwanted contracts. And so it goes on. I mentioned there about the entire developments, these buildings of developments being sold off before anybody can buy them, being sold off to overseas investors. But don't worry, Labour are going to make sure that doesn't happen. So a couple of things have happened here. Clearly what's happened is a cleaner has been cleaning the Labour Party office, and they've gone behind the sofa and they found this this folder, probably blown the cobwebs off, and it's got Labour policies. So Labour suddenly decided, actually, we've had no policy announcements for like 50 years. Let's unfurl a load. And obviously, they're trying to persuade the floating voters at the local elections on May the 4th, of which it's estimated a third of voters haven't made their mind up. So clearly, Labour have promised to be the fiscally responsible party, and yet they are making all these promises. So, Michael, I don't know if you like, you're green-fingered and you like gardening. Where is Labour's magic money tree?
Well, sometimes, Chris, you do surprise me with rare lines of understated wisdom, but this is not one of those moments. It's tired. I think you're obviously very nostalgic for the golden era of George Osborne with his 2015 Tory attack lines, bordering, frankly, on the meaningless. None of these initiatives are tied to large-scale capital spending. The only one where I think you've got some validity is the whole issue that Labour would freeze council tax this year. You either believe in empowering local politicians to make decisions or you don't. Centrally dictating to local councils that Keir Starmer thinks you shouldn't put up council tax is anti-democratic, and I don't agree with it. But these are about departmental priorities in central government, and they're also about empowering local councils through the Localism Act or the Local Government Act or in housing legislation to make meaningful strategic decisions for the benefit of local people on issues that they care about. And in particular, let's have a look at the one that you did look at. Selling investments into property off plan to overseas investors and then basically see these tower blocks. It's a big problem in London, by the way, of tower blocks where you just don't see any lights ever come on because people don't live in them. They just wait for the capital uplift for that apartment to rise in value and then they'll flog it on in a few years' time. How's that helping local people? So actually, if you could amend the legislation that actually has to be a home that somebody lives in, that's to people's benefit. Why is that an unpopular magic money tree issue? It's literally about retaining wealth and opportunity in this country, literally fertilizing the very ground that the money tree that will create the taxes and that we can improve our public services with can grow here, not in an overseas offshore tax haven. What's wrong with that?
I think the sentiment's right. Actually, you mentioned it's a big problem.
Do you agree with me? You were just being egregiously argumentative and evoking George Osborne.
No, what I'm saying is that Labour are making all these promises, and I don't think most of them will come to much. But in terms of the idea of not selling off developments to overseas investors, you mentioned it's a big problem in London. It's a big problem actually in Salford Quays as well. I think there's lots of those flats have been sold to international investors. And actually, last year I was lucky enough to go to Dubai, and the biggest building in Dubai is called the Burj Khalifa. It's huge. It would be if it's the biggest building in the world, but a number of those floors are empty and they've
Homes
been
are for
sold
living
off.
in.
Yeah, they've been sold off to investors.
Same in China.
Yeah, and they're just left empty.
All the incentives are wrong, and that is a big issue that needs to be looked at. And I'm glad that it's being raised as a debating topic by the Labour Party, even in the run up to this election. The other big issue in this country that nobody seems to take seriously is the outdated planning system, and I'm glad that that's been raised as a potential red hot issue, because we need to build more homes. When I worked in Stockport, the late great Sheila Bailey was the driving force behind Viaduct Homes, which builds local authority council housing in the town centre, mixed uses, mixed dwellings, and also uses land that had been used for commercial uses, shops basically, like the Sainsbury's supermarket, level it, knock it down, and build a new estate that people can live on, because people need houses.
And they do. Well, we
and
can
what the
agree on that.
LibDems are doing is saying, well, we don't want that in Stockport. We just want it all to be piled into the town centre and not to build on farmers' fields in High Lane and Woodford.
Okay.
Because people don't. Not in my backyard.
Well,
I'm a YIMBY. I'm a yes in my backyard.
Okay.
Because I've got 5 kids who need somewhere to live.
Well, we can agree on something. And we can also agree that that's the end of part 1. We're going to go to a interval with our sponsor, Lily Shippen.
I've interviewed plenty of business leaders in my time in journalism. When it comes to making big decisions, a lot of the leaders that I've interviewed use their PA or their EA as a big sounding board. And that's where Lily Shippen come in. They're a specialist recruitment agency for HR and business support staff. With bases in London and Manchester, Lily Shippen recruit a range of roles, including executive assistants, personal assistants, office managers, receptionists, HR business partners, and many, many more. They don't just know how to recruit HR and business support staff, but they know when to recruit. So if you're an MD, CEO or business leader, remember the name, Lily Shippen. Thank you very much to Lily Shippen. Welcome back to the Series 3 finale of the Northern Spin podcast.
I'll just come in there if I may, actually. Congratulations to Lily Shippen, who has just got engaged to her partner, Matt, as well. So we love a bit of good news. I love good news. You love good news. And Lily Shippen is delivering good news.
So, Chris, you mentioned last week, or no, it was 2 weeks ago, you ducked the issue last week, the junior doctor strike, which is in all the news at the moment. Junior doctors were, as you said, demanding a 35% pay rise. And I accused you of espousing Daily Mail headlines, and we agreed to revisit it for a more mature debate based on facts, evidence, and where the strike is likely to go next.
Absolutely.
What do you want to say?
Yeah, I think all we need to do is to try and say, these are the facts. Let's have a grown-up conversation. They weren't Daily Mail headlines. Everybody's reporting the fact that the junior doctors and their unions demanding a 35% pay rise. Now, it's a good time to return to this for a couple of reasons. The junior doctors just completed a 4-day strike. Consultants were drafted in to cover for the junior doctors. So visitors to A&E might not have noticed any significant changes, but there's a big cost implication for that. The big difference, the big problem is that every time the junior doctors go out on strike, a lot of these operation waiting times get longer and longer, and they're already long because of COVID and other delays. There's no dispute that the junior doctors are asking for a 35% pay rise. That is completely unrealistic. As a result, members of the Royal College of Nursing have looked at the 35% pay demand of the junior doctors, and they've rejected their own offer and announced another 48-hour strike. I would make a point, incidentally, and you mentioned it earlier, Unison have accepted a 5% pay rise and a one-off payment of at least £1,655. I respect people's right to labour, right to withdraw labour, but not when lives are being put at risk. I also think there's another point to be said here in terms of, I would almost separate the nurses from the junior doctors. The reason I say that for is that nurses don't always have a natural career progression. So you can have nurses who are very, very capable, completely dedicated to their job, working really hard, but they might find themselves on a certain level, pay grade, and not be able to climb up that pay grade. If you look at the situation with junior doctors, I think the starting salary is something like £29,000. After year one, it's £37,000. Year two, it's £43,000. They can climb up to become a registrar and then become a full consultant, and then they can do private work as well. The other thing that we do need to consider, and this is where we need to have a grown-up conversation, is that the NHS staff get 20% employee contributions to their pension. Now, most people get 5% tops.
Good for them.
Yeah.
Good for them.
Yeah, but you know, is it the best use of resources to say when you're retired you can take this, you know, gold-plated pension, or would it be better served to say, actually, let's split that 20%. Let's put 10% into your salary now, so you're able to access more money now, and you'll still have a healthy pension when you retire. Now, surely, Michael, you can't defend the idea that the next juniors doctor strike could potentially coincide with this 48-hour strike being planned by the Royal College of Nursing.
Because conservatives will often evoke something called the politics of envy, where they'll accuse people who are trade unionists or Labour supporters, socialists, whatever, of having the politics of envy, that they want to cut down people who are millionaires or fat cats and all the rest of it. And it's really interesting that that rhetoric they like it when it suits them, but they don't like it when suddenly somebody's looking for a little bit more. Somebody's looking for fairer terms and conditions. They're in an industrial dispute, and all their advantages get picked over, and they try and divide and rule. So first of all, union members in the Royal College of Nursing rejected the deal with their union, right? So I think I just want to unpack a few of the things that you said. So you made some really good points, particularly at the end, but I think I just want to unpack a few of the things that you said, because I think you've conflated a few different issues. It was the union members of the Royal College of Nursing that rejected the deal that their union had negotiated. So I think, bang, there goes one argument straight away in the attempts to divide and rule, that actually these are hardworking nurses who are being led by militant union leaders. And I think actually it turned out that the good old nurses weren't being led by their equivalent of Mick Lynch, but they're pretty angry. I think you fall in as well, if I may say, for the lazy argument, framing the negotiations of the government in dispute in a standoff position, and that workers are being unreasonable. I think the 35% issue illustrates just how much their pay has fallen since the Conservatives have been in power in 2010. Look at the evidence. Railway workers accepted an offer. Postal workers have accepted an offer. As of this morning, it's in the news. The reason the NHS Confederation and the British Medical Association are so hopping mad, and both are, when have you ever had a situation where the body representing NHS Trust and the union are both screaming at the government saying, get around the table? ACAS have intervened to try and interject and get things moving as well. But it's the government that won't negotiate, and the government that are throwing up this 35% as if it's some kind of blockage. It's not. It's an illustration about how much people's pay has fallen behind. So secondly, when you rang me on Friday and we had a first chat about how we could frame this discussion, I was actually at the wake for my friend, the late, great Peter W. Mount, CBE, former chairman of the Central Manchester Hospital NHS Trust. It was his funeral on Friday, a dear, dear friend of mine. This was something that I'd always go to Peter and discuss, actually, and ask for his take on it, because he's very wise, and I'm going to miss his insights. However, at that wake, Chris, were GPs, trust directors, nursing officers, practice managers, and they spoke of an absolute crisis in our NHS, that any amount of warm words about being a supporter of our nurses, but just doesn't cut it anymore. One GP told me that his practice was in such financial straits because of the way in which the funding flows into it. He's trying to recruit junior doctors to deliver a service to the people of the area where his practice is, but he just can't do it. It's almost impossible, because a GP can get a visa really easily to go and work in Australia, no language restrictions, transferable recognised qualifications for, wait for it, Chris, twice the money. £30,000 in this country, 60 grand to go and work in Australia. If I had that kind of skill and that kind of earning power as a journalist, I know where I'd be right now, and it wouldn't be in this studio with you, with the greatest respect, unless you wanted to hop on a plane to Perth. The fact that this situation has been allowed to slide into this state, and the workload, the crumbling infrastructure, the inability to cope, the stress, the mental anguish that people are feeling who work in the NHS. And I know that you've got family members who work in our health service as well, Chris, but there's just this deep sense of distrust and a breakdown in relations with the government. And it didn't help that Tory donors, Matt Hancock's landlord and Michelle Mone, were awarded big contracts from the magic money tree that the Tories have to fund the NHS when it suits them. There is an unprecedented wave of raw anger.
The reason I didn't want to interrupt you at all, because I think that we can have a civilized conversation about a really serious subject. And actually, broadly speaking, I think we agree on a lot of the things that we've both said. Nothing I've said is a dig at you. I've always been a big supporter of the nurses and the doctors. I've seen it with my own eyes, and the dedication. It is something that's a gift that they have. I do genuinely worry that the nurses and the doctors, they run the risk of losing the public support. It was interesting that
they're not, though, are they?
It was interesting that the RCN, if you look at the vote, was it 54% to 46%? I mean, that's not dissimilar to very dissimilar to the Brexit vote. That's not it's still the majority who voted to strike.
We're in a democracy, though.
Yeah, 100%. I'm getting that. What I'm saying is that, I'm saying this as somebody who's passionately in favour of the NHS, but I do think they run the risk of losing the public support. Incidentally, as do the government. The idea that Steve Barclay can sit in his ivory tower and not negotiate, that's not a that's not a position that can be maintained. I don't agree, for example. I mean, a lot of the issues that are being raised, also with the education service as well, it's not necessarily just about pay, it's also about working conditions. I've spoken to junior doctors, they work like 4 12-hour shifts on the bounce. By the time they get to day 3 and day 4, they're knackered. But they're not making decisions about whether to write a story and put it in Business Desk or Business Cloud like we are. They've been asked to make life and death calls. And if those decisions go wrong, it's their career on the line.
Oh, you should see some of the stories I have to write.
Yeah, absolutely. And I read every one of them. I enjoy it. I mentioned the issue about NHS employer contributions. I'm not going to criticise the police for getting good pensions and retiring after 30 years. They put their lives on the line for us, and I don't think you talk about the policy of envy. We've got to be careful in terms of the nurses and the junior doctors. I want them to be well remunerated. They do a fantastic job. I think Channel 4 did a really interesting fact checker about this 35% pay rise, because this is where I think we do need to say, these are the facts. And if the BMA or anybody else wants to come on and dispute them, please do. But this is as I understand it. So the BMA say the reason they've come up with this 35% pay rise is that junior doctors' pay in England has fallen by 26% since 2008-9, once you account for inflation. Now, there's the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS. That's a think tank. They say a more accurate figure would be between 11 and 16% fall since 2010. So the BMA use the Retail Prices Index, the RPI, but critics say that's flawed. So the concern is, and this is the concern, is that this figure of 35% is a lot higher than the actual figure. And the actual figure is probably somewhere closer to half that. So by coming in and saying we want a 35% pay rise, it's clearly a negotiating tactic to try to come in at a pay rise of about 15%. But with inflation running at 10 or 11%, there's no way Jeremy Hunt and co will go above 5. So all I'm saying is we do need to have a civilized conversation like we're trying to do, but 35% is unrealistic. So there has to be a middle ground, and it's not going to be above 7 or 8%.
But that's the point, Chris. There is a middle ground. ACAS have come into it, the Association of the Conciliation Service. Yeah. Steve Barclay has been urged both by the NHS Confederation and the BMA and ACAS to get around the table, and they're refusing to do so. It sort of suits the government to stoke the fires of discord for a bit, to demonise, to chip away at the support. And I think it's really cynical of them. You make some good points, and even by different inflation measures, I still think the fact that doctors are their pay has fallen behind chronically and their working conditions are unacceptably dangerous is a real issue. Anyway, are we going to move on? Or are we going to bore the listeners?
Just going to tell you one other thing as well, is that I saw the headline yesterday. Pat Cullen, the nurses union leader, she was on the telly, and she spoke about the fact, and the headline, which was in the BBC, said, strike action might last until Christmas. So what the unions do, they need to get a mandate for strike action, and that mandate would take them up to November, December. That's not to say, and I don't think this will happen instantly, that we'll have strike action until December. All I'm saying is that people see those headlines and they're scary. They scare people. You make the point that maybe this is what the government want. They want to scare people and then almost demonise the nurses, which they shouldn't, or demonise the doctors, which they shouldn't. But ordinary people see those type of headlines and that type of rhetoric, type of rhetoric. It scares them. It really scares them, and that I find reprehensible. I don't like it.
So moving on from something that's reprehensible, Suella Braverman.
Yeah, I see what you've done there.
Yeah.
A seamless link. Yeah, it was something I saw, which I thought was really interesting. It's very difficult for two middle-aged white guys like ourselves to talk about race. I don't think you can. It's very difficult for us to talk about gender issues as well.
I think, but if you think back, Chris, when we had... We have had guests on this podcast who've urged us, female guests who've urged us to be good allies. Yeah. Vim Apadou did that. She encouraged us to be allies, and we took some hints and leaned in and asked her how we can do that better.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't mean we can't say anything, though, does it?
No. Baroness Varsi commented last week. She accused Home Secretary Suella Braverman of using, quote, racist rhetoric. She didn't say in particular which bits were racist, but we can assume it was to do with the small boats crossings. Varsi is the first Asian person to chair the Tory party. She is a grandee of the Conservative Party. She said Braverman's...
She's younger than me and you.
Yeah, she's still a grandee, in my eyes at least. She said that Suella Braverman's ethnic origin has, her words, shielded her from criticism for too long, claiming Conservatives have been hesitant to hold an ethnic minority MP to account in the same way they would a white MP. I thought that was fascinating. Did you think to see here, Michael?
Yeah, definitely. I really like Sayeeda Varsi. I've met her a few times, and she's the right kind of Tory. So as well as you, I can actually get on with some Tories. And I'd encourage absolutely anybody out there to watch a BBC iPlayer programme, watching her winter walk with Simon Armitage around Yorkshire. It's really good, really good.
I think it's nice to see politicians doing things outside of political arenas as well.
Yeah.
Portillo did it really well with trains, didn't he?
Yes.
Michael Portillo. Something else I want to talk to you about is Manchester Airport. You recently came back from Rome. Did you go through Manchester Airport?
Yeah, Terminal 3. We went with Ryanair, which is always an experience.
In one of our earlier podcasts, both of us were very critical of Manchester Airport. Yeah. And in fairness as well, we opened it up to our listenership, and they were split as well. Some people felt it was good, but a lot of people felt it was absolutely dreadful. There has been some good news from Manchester Airport, and I think it's important for balance that we tell that. Yeah,
indeed. So I did a story on the business desk on Friday and just said, whisper it, but Manchester Airport might be getting better. So it's not so much that I'm not changing my tune or I've been bought off or anything like that. And I know you like your anecdotes as well, that amounts to evidence. But genuinely, I thought, oh yeah, this seems a bit better. Yeah, I've got through here a bit quicker. No, I'm not queuing through the car park to get in at 3 a.m. I wasn't told to get there 3 hours before the flight, and everything seemed to be running a bit quicker. And then I went to Terminal 2 to pick up my son, Matt, who was flying back from a convention in Texas. And I was genuinely pleasantly surprised. It just didn't seem very Manchester Airport at all. So I looked at the data. 99% of Easter weekend passengers got through security in under 15 minutes. That is an improvement. However, Terminal 3 is still too cramped, and by design, it's a very poor experience. Terminal 1 is still horrible, from everything I can gather. The car parks still stink like a urinal, and the signage is pretty unhelpful, again, by design. But they've hired more people, so you can get through security a lot quicker. The system seems to be working a bit better, and basically they're fulfilling their obligation to be able to get people to take aeroplanes on time. And that's got to be a good thing.
But Manchester Airport is key to the Northwest economy.
It is. It's a gateway to the Northwest.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad to see things are improving at Manchester Airport.
Yep, so there's an election going on at the moment, so all the politicians are on their best behaviour, so there's no one standing out for our section on manoeuvres, so we're replacing it with On My Soapbox. You're not happy, Chris, are you, about the growing problem about the boozy behaviour of theatregoers?
I'm probably not as angry as you are, but that's because you are culturally more enlightened than me. I'm a twin. My twin brother goes to the theatre quite a lot. He got the culture gene in our family. There was a story which we were talking about off air earlier about Manchester's Palace Theatre, and they had a performance of The Bodyguard, and it was stopped before the end because people were singing over the lead during the final song. Now, I'll be honest with you, if I was paying 50, 60 quid to watch a performance of The Bodyguard at the Palace Theatre, I probably wouldn't want John from my street next door singing at the same time. You think there's something more sinister?
Yeah, there is. So
here?
Fair play to the Mill, Manchester's insurgent online newspaper.
Giving credit to another media organisation,
Exactly.
Michael.
So Yoshi and Daryl on their podcast last week did a really interesting experiment. So they talked about this. Daryl got one of his friends who's an actor who said, this is a really serious problem. Now, this actor, I can't remember his name, but he'd been in 9 to 5, which was at the Palace Theatre. My Rachel and her mum, Margaret, went to that. And Rachel said she felt really unsafe. Yeah, she said there were so many drunk people. They had to stop the performance. I think there's a couple of things. The main one is I think people have lost a certain decorum and a set of manners. They don't know how to behave in public anymore. Maybe it was being locked up at home for a couple of years. But I think people's behaviour has really negatively changed. Anyway, the thing the Mill did, they went online to book a ticket to go and see The Bodyguard at the Palace Theatre in Manchester. And Yoshi got his laptop out and he booked a ticket. And then the next window pops up. Why not upgrade to the Manchester package? A bottle of Prosecco and some crisps. And then the next one, why not also add a couple of cheeky gins and tonics? So basically the Palace Theatre are saying, fancy a night out at musical theatre? Get leathered. Come along. Yeah. Mm. So it's almost building into the experience that this is now a raucous booze fest. And, I'm on record as saying, I think this country's got a massive alcohol problem. Yeah. And I'm going to speak out about it at every opportunity. And you can call me a killjoy if you want. You won't, but someone might. But genuinely, I think people need to take a really good look at themselves and think about their behaviour, how it affects other people, and just the human cost and what it costs our NHS, which you spoke about before as well. The amount of people who are obese or dying early because of drink.
My daughter went to do bingo at the weekend. I mean, she's only 22, and a lot of people there had a few. It's fair to say, and what I would say is that the vast majority of people, in terms of drinking, it's fine. In terms of if it's managed, if it's in moderation, but it's becoming an increasing problem when people drink to excess, and then they impose their behaviour on other people and ruin the experience.
And you're not telling me that story that we talked about last week as well with the CBI. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the whole sort of socialization around workplaces and works dues. You're not telling me that drink wasn't taken at those dues where women felt unsafe, and which ultimately resulted in women feeling so vulnerable at work that they put complaints in, and the chief exec the director general was ultimately sacked.
Well, I can ask you a question actually, and it's something we've not prepared for. Right? Okay, you stopped drinking 10 years ago.
More than that.
Yeah, more than 10 years ago. So I'm 50, nearly 51.
Yeah.
And I like a drink on a Friday and on a Saturday. It's always the same: whiskey and coke. I've only ever in my entire life been drunk 3 times, and the reason I didn't like not being in control. And that's the reason when I never, ever have anything to drink when I'm driving. And if I ever feel like I'm losing control, you get a bit heady, I stop drinking. And I'll only ever have a maximum of 3. Now, you're right. Some people say, oh, you're a killjoy, Chris, because you only have 3 and you don't want to reach into your wallet and do a round. What was it about drink that convinced you to stop drinking?
I didn't enjoy it anymore. It's a bit like golf. And I wasn't particularly good at it either. I couldn't hold my drink. I didn't like it. I didn't like how it made me feel, its effect on my health, its effect on my behaviour, and also the fact that I've got kids. And I didn't ever want that situation where one of my sons rings me up and says, Dad, I'm in trouble. Can you come and get me? And I go, oh, sorry, son, I've had a drink.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point.
There are many more reasons that I don't particularly want to go into in public, but more examples I could share, which is humiliating and embarrassing. But no, for all of the above, which I think is reason enough.
Yeah. Well,
and on that note, we're going to go to a party pooper break.
Okay. Red Flag Alert is a Manchester-based data intelligence platform, and they've produced a clever online tool called Growth Flag. Growth Flag pulls live data from a comprehensive data set and quickly shows where growth potential exists in individual businesses across the UK. Remember the name, Red Flag Alert and Growth Flag.
Welcome back to the third and final part of Northern Spin, and a big thanks to our sponsor, Red Flag Alert Growth Flag. We call this the fun bit, Chris. After my party poop a bit just before the break.
Yeah.
I'm particularly keen to find out how your first game of the cricket season went on Sunday. Playing for White Coppice still this season?
Absolutely, still playing for White Coppice. Yeah,
is that in the Chorley League or?
Yeah, it's the Palace Shield League actually. The Moore and Smalley Palace Shield League. There's about 8 divisions. I mean, the league season starts on Saturday, so I'm not going to make excuses, Michael. So it was just a friendly game. It's just a bit of fun.
And how did you do? You're a batsman, right? Opening bat?
Yeah, I am. I am an opening bat. But I'll be honest with you, Michael.
Hit it for 6?
No, well, I mean, I'm not going to make excuses, and people really aren't interested in my own performance. But
you were out first ball, weren't you?
The wicket was really green. Yeah, it was out first ball of the season. But what it was, and I know you're not a cricket aficionado like I am, but you know, I've practiced all winter in the nets. I've spent a lot of money on bowling machines, you know, facing balls about 65, 70 miles an hour. I went out on a wicket that was so green and so slow. We call it a sticky dog.
A bad workman blames his tools.
This spinner came on, bowled up the hill, bowled a filthy little ball outside off stump. England Freckleton, you know who you are, great bunch of lads incidentally. And at the last minute, I thought, the first ball of this season, I thought I'll just get off the mark and hit that through the covers. And I managed to spoon it back. He caught it on the third attempt. He cruelly deceived me. And I was out first ball. Worst thing is, because it was a friendly game, they enabled me to bat again, allowed me to bat again. I came back in and got 2. Terrible.
Right. Well, that's something, isn't it?
I'm improving.
What else have I been doing? Loads of funerals, sadly. A ridiculous workload. I've been writing about independent cinemas, Gig Pig, and a smart app that matches venues with artists.
I like them. I had one of their people on one of my panels recently as well. I like the idea.
Good. I was also told off for calling Abersock in Wales Wilmslow by the Sea. Apparently that's exactly the thing that their new PR supremo, the queen of events, Liz Taylor, has been brought in to move on from that image. And they want to call it the Welsh Riviera, which is hilarious. I discovered a Twitter account as well called @CheshireSet, which catalogues life in the resort of Abersock, which is, I would encourage you to look at.
The thing is, sometimes you'll come up with glib lines and I'll think to myself, that's a bit naughty. But the bottom line is, loads of people that I know have got holiday homes in Abersock. And a lot of them, their main home is in Cheshire. So when you call it Wilmslow by the Sea, you're probably not being factually incorrect.
It's probably the elderly edge lot who don't like it being called Wilmslow. They think it demeans it because they think of Wilmslow as being a bit fur coat, no knickers. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But good luck to Liz Taylor. She's a really impressive woman. And if anyone can rebrand it, she can. She's specifically working for a part of it called the Warren, which they have said is a very exclusive resort, which you can't go to unless you own a unit there. Anyway, this Thursday, I'm off to the Lake District, not to a private holiday home on a private estate, but with fresh walks to lug my untrained, overworked, underperforming legs up Scarfell Pike. Wish me luck.
Yeah, well, I think the weather should be good for you on Thursday, actually.
Hope so. What about you?
I'm due to go to Edinburgh this week, but last week I hosted the Yorkshire Tech Climbers in Leeds. Run that with Active Profile, Business Cloud, the media partners. 100 people in the room, loads of great businesses. I've been to Leeds a lot. I used to work at the Yorkshire Evening Post back in the day. First time I stayed down at Leeds Docks, opposite the Leeds Royal Armouries. I went for a couple of quick runs along the canal. I don't do a long run because it was the marathon in Manchester at the weekend. My next door neighbour did it in 3 hours, 56 minutes. Leeds Docks doesn't get the same attention as Media City, but it's really impressive. And I think Leeds is probably the most up and coming city in the north.
So, you know that space, did you do the event in that big space next to the Royal Armouries, that event space?
No, I've done.
It used to be called Savile Hall.
Oh, no, we did.
Not after Peter Savile.
We did it further up. We did it further up in a bar, flexible workspace. But it's just a really impressive what they've done in Leeds. And cool. I also interviewed Jenny Johnson.
You're a big name dropper. Who have you been hanging out with and interviewing?
Well, I mean, I interviewed Jenny Johnson. She, I run I run a monthly group called Proactive Progress. We bring together like-minded, fast-growing businesses, and we have a monthly meeting, and we bring a guest in every month rather. Jenny Johnson, she ran a nursery business called Kids Aloud for 17 years. She was very dissatisfied at the level of nursery provision that there was for her own children. So she thought, you know what? She literally that day, she wrote out a business plan and launched Kids Aloud, ran it for 17 years, sold it just before the lockdown. She was going to retire, and then she had this epiphany, and she got her mojo back because she came up with another idea called My First 5 Years, which is it's a development app, and it monitors kids for the first 5 years of their life. Incredible business. She's incredible. She's authentic. She's humble. She's got a younger daughter who plays football, so we have a shared interest as well.
Very good. Another cultural reference. I got this book sent to me by Bernard Gins, former the business editor of the Yorkshire Post. He's written a book called Outcast, Cook versus the City, which is, I'm really looking forward to reading it. It's got a great citation on the back from Gary Wilson from Endless. You probably know him, don't you?
I don't know Gary personally, but I know Endless.
I do. And he's a very, very, very good friend of mine. But yeah, no, it's about a big corporate battle. So I'm looking forward to reading that.
Do you pay for any books? You just get them all sent to you?
Well, Bernard sent me that one. Yeah, I buy loads of books.
I want to talk to you about...
I buy them from House of Books and Friends at the top of King Street.
Okay. Well, I'm pleased to hear, because you're still old-fashioned, that you like reading books, don't you?
Is that old-fashioned?
Well, it's more old-fashioned than me. I'm an Audible man, but a lot of people are Kindle people as well. Oh. Archers, are you a big fan?
What, you mean the Radio 4 drama? Sadly, no, I'm not.
No, Archers as in the Archers Under Railways. Now, when I thought of Archers, I obviously think of EastEnders, because there was a garage under the Archers. But I read a story last week and it really caught my eye. So
how can I be a fan of them? Why is it one of those things that you can either like or dislike?
Because the thing is, what it does is it takes a existing infrastructure, which is a railway bridge, which has natural built arches in it, and it creates a new use for those arches.
What's not to like about that?
Well, that's what I like about it. So there's a company called the Arch Company, which I think is a great name. It does what it says on the tin.
Will there ever be a boy born who could outswim a shark?
Probably not. No,
it just seems it's one of those inconsequential comments.
Okay. Well, I'm going to. I think that's a really interesting comment you just made. Then I'm trying to process it in my mind while we're talking.
Well, if you get where it comes from, fine. If you don't, you probably need to read more.
Okay.
Anyway.
The Arch Company, just to give you some background about them, they want to bring 1,000 empty or derelict spaces across England and Wales back into use by 2030. And we hear a lot about trying to revitalise city centres, town centres. Obviously, Labour have promised to revitalise, high streets. That was one of their 50 promises that they made last week.
It was also a levelling up pledge by Boris Johnson.
Yeah. I mean, we could play this game of tennis all day. But what was interesting about the article that I read last week is that they want to bring in or revitalise 10 arches, abandoned railway arches. I think it's in Corporation Street in Manchester City Centre. If you walk down past home, which is fantastic the way they've revitalised that, there's a load of arches on the right-hand side as you walk into town. And they want to bring these arches back into use. I just think it's fantastic.
I don't think that's where it is, because I think they are all opened up. I mean, the Green Room right up at the top of Whitworth Street was for a while. I think Corporation Street's in Salford, isn't it?
Oh, right, because they do own a number of arches in Salford as well.
Yeah. Well, it's great news anyway, isn't it? I think we both agree on that one. So what else did you want to ask me?
Well, in terms of
culture tips?
Have you got any more cultural offerings?
Yes, I've been writing about independent cinemas. There's the Rex in Wilmslow. Not fur coat, no knickers. Okay. Everyman in Liverpool, Manchester and Altrincham. I didn't realise, but Everyman Cinemas is quoted on the stock market, and they had quite decent results that they announced last week. They seem to be doing quite well. Now, you go to mainstream cinemas, don't you? Which is your local one in...
Yeah, go to View quite a lot.
Is that at Middlebrook in Bolton?
Yeah, we go to two. We go to the Capital Centre, or we go to the one at Middlebrook.
Yeah, I just think those private equity-owned big cinema chains have just become really overpriced, commoditized, dirty, margin squeezing, overpriced pick and mix, sugary drinks, popcorn for 15 quid.
Is it Cineworld that's really struggling at the moment?
Well, yeah. Cineworld's in administration and View Cinemas is filing for bankruptcy in America. Yeah, they're both in a lot of bother, but that more intimate thing, like our local cinema in Marple, is a single screen thing called the Regent. The Rex in Wilmslow is aligned with the Savoy in Heaton Moor in Stockport as well. I'm going to have a chat to the guy behind that in the next couple of weeks. Really interesting. And of course, the other thing I've been doing is watching Succession. Oh my God. Have you guys been watching Succession? You don't know what you're missing.
Just for those people not viewing this on YouTube, Michael's talking to our two members of our producers who produce this podcast. We're not producing to a live audience. I am going to watch Succession, but I need to get a subscription for it. Yesterday I watched I paid £4.49 for it, but me and the family, we watched the Whitney Houston film I Want to Dance with Somebody. Now, she died in 2012. She's aged 48. It's really sad, actually. Her descent. It's just a descent into drugs. The role of Whitney Houston was played by a brilliant English actress who I'd not heard of before, called Naomi Ackie. She was absolutely sensational. She's 31, born in Walthamstow. She was just a brilliant performance. Now, the reason I want to mention it for is because Whitney, her record producer, Clive Davis, in the film is played by Stanley Tucci, who you mentioned last week.
I did. You're reading his book. Fantastic, yeah.
He was brilliant as well.
He's great. Yeah. So I have been watching his Instagram. He does some great little flaneuring videos and a bit of food. Yeah, fantastic.
Because I read actually that Stanley Tucci, you tell me, or correct me if I'm wrong, didn't he have throat cancer or something which affected his ability to eat certain foods? So he has to limit what he eats. So you mentioned... I read it on Wikipedia. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. We'll apologise. But that's what I read after this particular film.
The coolest man alive. Anyway, that's all for episode 10 of season 3 of Northern Spin. We're ending this entire series on one of our favourite discussion topics, Stanley Tucci. That's good. We'll be taking a short break, but season 4 will be back in May after the local elections. We're also on Apple Podcasts. Please review us. Don't forget to press the subscribe button on any platform that you watch us on or listen to us on. Follow us on Twitter at Northern_spin1. Watch us on YouTube. Thank you to What Media, to Jamie and Ellis for recording this podcast, to our sponsors, Oscar Technology, Lily Shippen, and Growth Flag in conjunction with Red Flag Alert. And a special mention to Elliot Taylor for providing the music. My name is Michael Taylor. This has been Northern Spin.
And as always, my name is Happy Clappy Chris Maguire.